Hello, my Juicy Co-creators. Lilou here on the Juicy Living Tour Europe. Today, I'm with Dr. David Hamilton here in Glasgow, in your home, nearly your hometown in Scotland.
Almost my hometown in Scotland, yeah. Yeah.
So I know you find him cute. I know you love his accent, and I know you find his thoughts absolutely fascinating. I love your research. I've enjoyed so much our last interview over Skype, maybe 2 years ago.
Yeah, about 2 years ago, yeah. It was so much fun, actually. And this is even better because now it's live.
Yes.
Yeah.
In person, and this is quite special because this weekend you're at the I Can Do It conference. It's a big one.
Yeah, I'm so excited because it's my first really big conference in Scotland. You know, I used to be a scientist and I resigned from my job about 12 years ago, really, and to go out and do this kind of thing. And most of my talks have been around the world, you know, in England, and I've been in the States and stuff, but I've never done a big conference in Scotland. But I visualised this about 10 years ago. And it's funny because I visualised myself speaking right after Wayne Dyer. And at the I Can Do It tomorrow, I'm right after Wayne Dyer. I'd also visualised a high five, so we'll see if that happens as well.
And Wayne is so amazing to be surrounded by powerful, inspirational speakers and researchers. What a blessing. And you've definitely deserved that spot.
Oh, thanks very much. I'm really looking forward to it. I love talking about, you know, the power of the mind and how we can, you know, our thinking and our beliefs and our hopes and dreams can actually be shaped in the world through what we intend. You know, and also through the circuits of the body as well, how we shape the chemistry of our lives, you know, the events, the circumstances and the relationships, etc. But also we shape the chemistry, the health of the body through where we position our minds. Yeah.
Tell us about your background. Let's recap, because you came out of the pharmaceutical industry. You gave up your salary. You give up all that kind of prestigious kind of state, if we can, status within the normal society, to really live what your heart felt like living and to prove something else.
Yeah. I did a PhD in this city, actually, in Glasgow. And it was organic chemistry, which is the building up of molecules. So you stick atoms together. And I worked in the pharmaceutical industry, developing drugs for cancer and cardiovascular disease. But I became so fascinated with the placebo effect. You know, in fact, in cardiovascular drugs, which is my main field, there were times when, you know, and you can see this in the literature, there are times where the difference between the drug and the placebo is very small. So hundreds of people are getting better, thousands often, depending on the size of the trial, are making improvements on placebos, which are made of chalk, blackboard chalk, or sugar, only because they think they're getting a drug. So seeing that type of thing repeat itself in the industry, I thought, I'm so interested in this. So it was a no-brainer, if you like, for me. I could no longer work in a job where I was doing something that wasn't my passion. So I just decided to resign and go out and start researching and writing about the ability of the mind to shape the health of the body and shape the circumstances of our lives. And I've written now 7 books on the whole, broadly on the whole topic from different angles.
Things in life don't always go according to plan. Like my microphone right now is upside down. Am I going to restart this interview because my microphone is upside down? No, I'm not. I'm enjoying this. This is our interview. This is our moment. You're heading next to your parents, and then tomorrow you have your conference. We have to face those moments. Is it? I know that your latest book, remind us the title?
It's called Is Your Life Mapped Out?
Is Your Life Mapped Out? And that's coming out on the 1st of October.
1st of October, yeah.
Do you speak also about that? Because you deal with destiny, free will. There is those incidents, those moments, those challenges, big, small, where we can feel more or less uncomfortable. Did you figure out some things on how to deal with those?
Absolutely, yeah. In fact, I'm speaking on that subject at the I Can Do It conference in London the following week after the Glasgow one. And I talk about why some things just happen. You know, why is it that you meet particular people in your life, why some moments are significant for a reason. And I really do believe that there are deeper forces at bay. I mean, I think we have this idea, especially when we read all about the law of attraction, we have this idea that life is a blank canvas. So we think, I'm on a boat, to use a metaphor I often use, I'm on a canoe, a small boat on a river, and I have a paddle. And my paddle, my mind is the direction of my paddle. So I can paddle to the left or the right, or most people round in a little circle, round and round again. But what we forget is that the river actually has a current. And sometimes the river is taking us to particular people and even taking us to particular events. And I wouldn't necessarily say it's an absolute given, some of the circumstances of our lives, but I would say there's a high likelihood that regardless of the choices we make, we will probably end up there or that or thereabouts. So I think there's a deep, I refer to it as a kind of magnetic attraction, a very deep level of reality where some people are strongly interconnected. And you could be born in different parts of the world, different countries, different times, but as you go through your life, that connection begins to get stronger and stronger. So you find yourself, without even thinking about it, you end up in the same place at the same time. And I think soulmates meet in this kind of way, but I'm not just referring to soulmates, but the people that are important in your life for a number of different reasons, for a particular job, for a particular change in your life. For example, I think there are certain things, and even just small things that don't have any great meaning but are important in that moment. Could I share with you an example actually?
Yeah, are we talking of quantum entanglement?
Yeah. I would say it's an aspect of quantum entanglement. I would say quantum entanglement is a shadow of something much more deeper and more profound, where the interconnectedness is not necessarily through quarks and protons and electrons, but the interconnectedness is through some facet of consciousness itself. So I would say entanglement is a shadow of that deeper, more profound connection. And to just give you an example of not a big groundbreaking thing, but how certain things can happen weirdly. Right? A couple of years ago, my partner Elizabeth and I were in New York City, and I'd been speaking at a Hay House event called You Can Heal Your Life at the Javits Centre in New York. And we'd never been in New York, so we thought, let's check out the city. So Elizabeth and I are walking around one day, and we got lost. And Elizabeth had written this book, a comedy book called God Must Be a Man. All the things that women have to go through that men don't. And just really poking fun at the whole thing that women have a harder time than men, just in a comedy way. And she thought, I'd love to ask Joan Rivers to read this book. If every author, when you write a book for the first time, you would love to have it seen by other authors. And lots of people ask me to read their books and stuff, and I do what I can. And Elizabeth thought, I'd love to show it to Joan Rivers. But we thought, we don't know Joan Rivers. So anyway, an hour or so later, we're wandering through the city of New York. We'd probably travelled about a mile, completely lost, no idea where we were, walking along a street. And we noticed this lovely big apartment complex. And Elizabeth said, isn't that really beautiful? And we're standing and admiring the architecture. A car pulled up alongside of us. We looked down and Joan Rivers stepped out of the car. And you thought, whoa, how is that possible? Right? And I think many of people watching this right now can relate to this in their life. Some of these seemingly bizarre synchronistic events. And I think that they happen because at a deep level, certain things, there are certain significant moments. So people and events are entangled at a very deep level of reality, and it's such a strong and powerful connection that the chances are, regardless of the choices you make, you'll probably end up there, that or thereabouts. So there's particular people in our lives, and this, as I say, this encompasses soulmates, but also much broader than this, the people who are important for a reason, a season or a lifetime, as they say. But there's many interconnections that are very subtle, but they're there for a very important reason, and it's like an elastic band that's invisible, like a magnetic attraction that just gradually pulls us through time and space to be in the same place at the right particular time.
Is that what we call destiny?
Yeah, and I would say that is an aspect of what we call destiny. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But you speak of destiny versus free will. So there is those events that happen, and we can interpret it in a different way. We can welcome them. We can say yes or no. There is we hold back or not. Yeah, and I would say, to use the metaphor of being on the wide river on a small boat with a paddle, there are times in our life when the river has almost no current. And we really feel that everything we are doing is our own choices. And everything, I think most people can relate to the periods of their life where you feel everything I'm aspiring, everything I'm trying to do is happening. But other times in our life we feel no matter what I'm trying to do, I'm up against a wall. And I would say that those times are when there's a current in your life. And sometimes that current can be very important. Sometimes it can be related to our own beliefs in our lives, but many times there are deeper forces at bay taking us to particular places for particular reasons that we may not understand, and most of us do not understand at the time, because sometimes they can take us into really difficult experiences in our lives. But I would say that the opportunity there for us
is the invitation, if you like, is for us to take the situation and say, how can I become more? I mean, I think you can interpret any situation in any way, but I think a healthy way then is to say, how can I use this situation to become the best I can be, to become more than I've ever been before? And then we give the situation meaning. And perhaps that was the whole point of it, of being in that situation, is for us to give it meaning in that way and become the person that we need to become for the next phase of our lives.
What happens in the brain when we start to make those decisions and really those actions in our life, and we say yes to one of those events, or we finally start to doing it in a different way, in a more positive way, and having those thoughts and moving forward? What happens there?
Yeah, well, the brain, I think many people have this idea that, and I'm talking many people in the mainstream, I suppose, that the brain is hardwired. And that's not completely correct. There are parts of the brain that grow according to a genetic program, but most of the brain is growing and changing constantly as we experience the moments of our lives. So the brain is always changing. In fact, it's called neuroplasticity, and the brain will basically grow and change till you take your last breath. You know, the analogy used to be the brain as you're growing up as a child and as a young adult, the brain is like dough, and you can knead the dough to make the bread into any shape. Then you put it in the oven, it comes out with a crust on it. That analogy's been thrown out the window now. Now we know that you never put the dough in the oven. So the brain is growing and changing till you take your last breath. And it changes in response to what you learn in life and your experiences in life. But it also changes in response to what you're thinking about, what you're telling yourself to be true. Everything that you're thinking, visualization, for example, powerfully shapes the brain and the area of the brain connected to those parts that we're visualizing. So if I'm visualizing my little finger moving, then the area of the brain connected to my little finger will substantially grow, and it will continue to grow the more I imagine moving my finger. So as we make different choices in our life and define who we want to be and what we move towards and keep thinking of it, then the brain will actually shape itself around what we're telling ourselves, what we're saying to be true, if it's an affirmation, for example. So as we embrace a different direction in our life and start to think about it and contemplate it and speak about it and live it, so the brain comes with us, if you like. And it's not necessarily the brain leading us, the brain comes with us in terms of it shapes itself to fit into our decisions and choices. You were working for the pharmaceutical industry. At some point, it was no longer possible for you to live and to work for them. There's some people right now on the planet we feel don't hear some of those thoughts and those conversations. They still consider it as new age or as different. And thanks to your work, we're bridging it with science and able to explain it. But do you think some people do want a better life, though? There's this struggle at some point that we face. Yours seemed to be quite quick. You had the evidence, you found the evidence, but you were open-minded enough. How can we throw in ourselves, or what's the process into not just hearing it, but really living it and giving ourselves the chance to live this juicier life? I like that, live this juicier life. I have found that a leap of faith is often necessary. I was in a very well-paid job in the pharmaceutical industry, and I had been given internal opportunities. What I mean by that is certain people are earmarked in companies who have potential to be very, very senior, like board of directors and stuff, and I was earmarked in that kind of capacity. And so I was given opportunities that were way above my grade level, and I had a fantastic career mapped out, if you like, but I couldn't do it because my heart wasn't in it, but it was scary to say, well, I'm going to go off and be a public speaker, because actually at the time, speaking in front of people terrified the life out of me. Now, absolutely, me speaking in front, the first time I was asked to give a talk, I partially wet myself. I was so nervous, really, and I think a lot of people watching can relate to that. We get so nervous, but I had to take a leap of faith. And I find in my life when I have, even though it's hard, even though I'm terrified, but some part of you knows that it's the right thing to do. I found when I take that leap of faith, even though it's not easy at first, sometimes it is, but most of the time it's not, it always turns out to be the right thing. And life becomes much juicier. My life is 1,000,000 times juicier than it was when I worked in the pharmaceutical industry. I get to write about the stuff that I want to write about, that I'm passionate about. I get to speak to audiences and inspire people with, you know, with how powerful they are, how important they are, how important how much they can shape the destiny of the world by being a good person, for example. I could never have been allowed to say that in the pharmaceutical industry, or if I did, people would have laughed at me. But now I can do it because I want to do it. And so I gave myself that freedom with this leap of faith. Now, not everyone is in the position where you can take a leap of faith like that. And, you know, and I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all in life. What applies to vast amounts of people doesn't necessarily apply to other people. You know, and sometimes we just have to find our own way in life. And I don't think there's a single solution that will fit everyone. So, for example, when I was doing my PhD and I was starting to read some books on positive thinking and metaphysics and stuff, you know, and I read some books and people would say, one day I had a really, you know, I woke up one morning, I was enlightened. And I thought, I want to be enlightened like that. I want that to happen to me, but it didn't happen. And that for me, but I felt there was something wrong with me because I couldn't reach enlightenment overnight or in 2 hours or something. So for me, it was a gradual process. And I would say it's still a gradual process. And I can't particularly say there was a day where I took a leap of consciousness, if you define it in that term. It's been a very much a gradual process. And I think that's a large part of the population probably evolves in that type of way. So therefore, it's just having faith that no matter what's happening in my life, no matter what choices I make, if I just try to see my life as a series of opportunities for me to be the best I can be. And the best doesn't necessarily mean to be the strongest, the fastest, you know, in classical terms, but the best being the nicest person, the most compassionate, the most understanding, the most patient, or for me it's often been the most confident, because I didn't grow up being confident. Confidence has been one of the most difficult things for me to develop. I mean, I'm speaking, you know, tomorrow in front of 700 people in Glasgow and 1,000 people in London the following week, and anyone listen to me and I say I have confidence issues, and they go, what are you no way. But yeah, I have to work with these kind of things. And it's about taking these situations and saying, well, how can I be the next best I can be? And then you don't have to solve all your problems in a day. You're cutting yourself some slack and you're saying, some days I might not do as well as I would do in other days. And you're giving yourself the opportunity to go up and down. But the up and down is in an upwards trajectory. So there will be bad days, there will be good days, but overall, over time, you're going in an upwards direction. And if you cut yourself that slack, then you don't have to be in a rush to become enlightened. You can just be yourself, but just be a good person. And if you just be a good person, in other words, kind and compassionate, gentle with people and empathetic, then you will always be going in an upwards trajectory. And the deeper forces at bay will present you with opportunities to get there and to be the best that you can be. That's been my personal experience in life.
Yeah. It's amazing to hear scientific say that.
Yeah. I would say this is not the kind of conversations I had in a science lab when I was building cardiovascular and cancer drugs. If I spoke like that then, I would probably have been laughed at, or at least people saying, what are you talking? That's a lot of rubbish. Because I think we often have, I call it knee-jerk skepticism. You know, and knee-jerk skepticism often occurs from people that know little or nothing about what they're skeptical about. It just doesn't sound possible. So having been in that environment, it's helped to be in that environment, because then I know how to bridge that gap. Because I think what's useful, I mean, so much of the stuff that people in self-help and motivation and mind, body, spirit and spirituality, if you lump them all together, they have understanding of things and attitudes and beliefs. And the material that they use and the things that are beneficial and the understandings would help a larger part of the population. But people looking in from the outside think this is woo-woo, or, you know, that's spiritual stuff, and you have this knee-jerk skepticism. So what I find myself doing, having worked in a science environment, is finding a way to communicate this stuff to these people here. And finding a way of communicating even out there very technically complex science that's beneficial for human understanding and for human growth, and explaining it in the simplest possible terms so that my mum and dad and my auntie Jean and you know, kids can understand it. And that's my thing. If other than my job, that's my thing, is taking complex stuff and making it sound really easy and understandable. And I find that I create, therefore, a bridge that allows these people who would ordinarily think this was woo-woo stuff, and a route in to say, well, wait a minute, that I can apply that to my life. I didn't realise there was scientific evidence for it. And I'm finding it's like an explosion of interest in the mainstream. I mean, I find myself now being interviewed by all the mainstream magazines in the UK. In fact, I was interviewed a few months ago by Good Housekeeping in the US, on kindness and and how kindness and compassion physically impact your blood vessels. Now, 10 years ago, I would never have got interviews like that. Now I do 2 interviews a week somewhere, mostly on all these ideas that a decade ago people would have laughed at, because all of the things I talk about are now backed up with science. It just, people don't realise that there is so much science to back up all this stuff. And I find it so exciting, because all of a sudden people that really can benefit from this stuff are getting the benefit, because they just needed to know that that stuff is real. And everyone else in the mind, body, spirit arena, they get the evidence so that it confirms to them what they've always believed, but no one believed them when they told. Because I find many people in here have friends out here, so to speak, and these friends out here don't necessarily agree, and sometimes it's husbands and wives, and the wives are in here, the husbands are out here. And now when you have the evidence, the husbands and wives are understanding each other better, because the husbands are now understanding that the wives were right all along, because here's the evidence. And now and I find people say, what I'm actually teaching is helping their relationships.
I really totally get that. Tell us about some experiences that were made that shows that actually through even visualizing and thinking, it changes the brain, it changes the chemicals.
Yeah, well, one of my favourite pieces of research it was done by Harvard University, and they were demonstrating a concept called neuroplasticity. And basically they got volunteers to sit in front of a piano and go, with each of the 5 finger muscles, plunk, 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 repetitively, 2 hours, 5 consecutive days, so Monday through Friday. And they imaged the brain every day. And they found that the area of the brain connected to the finger muscles began to grow like a muscle. By the Friday, it was substantially bigger than it was on the Monday. Now, that's neuroplasticity. But the exciting part of the research is a separate group of people, instead of physically playing the notes, they did it in their heads. So they had to imagine playing the notes. So for the same 2 hours on the 5 consecutive days, Monday through Friday, they imagined, without moving muscles, they imagined going plunk, 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 plunk. But amazingly, when you image the brain every day, on the Friday, the area of the brain had also massively changed to the same degree. If you placed the brain images from those who physically played the notes side by side with those who imagined playing the notes and mixed them up, you couldn't tell the difference. So there you have, just imagining something is physically changing the structure of the brain. And I often say to people, if just imagining something can do that, what else do you think you're capable of doing? Even in terms of self-healing, in terms of shaping the circumstances of your life, if you can do that, what else are you capable of doing? Because it wipes out that idea that many people have. And I grew up with this idea that I thought, you have a thought and it's just this floaty thing that disappears into the ether. It has no value other than an interpretation of an event in life. Here we now understand that a thought itself has physiological consequences in the brain. So rather than thoughts just disappearing, being interpretations of things, thoughts physically shape the brain, and they physically shape and impact many of the biological processes in the body. And that's a paradigm shift in our understanding of ourselves, because all of a sudden we feel, I am much more than I thought I was, and I'm much more powerful than I ever thought I was.
And it's when we're in that state, can we call that a state, that then we're connected to something much bigger, and we actually even get more guidance and help and support?
I would absolutely say so. I think when we tap into something so that we know is true about ourselves, then we access it. People call it another state, another level of consciousness. I believe that at a very deep level we are interconnected, and there is a field, and this is not something that mainstream science would necessarily agree with, but underneath the normal quantum field that we call it, where protons and electrons and quarks appear and disappear from, that is often referred to as inert. I don't necessarily agree with that, and a growing body of scientists also don't necessarily agree, because what consciousness is called the hard problem. that no one actually knows. Neuroscientists don't actually know what consciousness is. It's called the hard problem. And a growing body of researchers are now suggesting, and I definitely agree with this, that perhaps consciousness is something more fundamental to nature, to reality itself. So underneath the quantum field, rather than it being inert, maybe there's a deeper level where consciousness has its domain, and therefore what that means, and I think of reality at that level like everything's connected like a piece of elastic sheet, and if you stretch the elastic up to this size, macroscopic reality, the big things, then things seem physically spaced out and people seem physically separate, but actually you're connected through the elastic. And when you get to the deepest level, then we're all interconnected, and the elastic itself is a field of consciousness. So everything is interconnected. There's ideas floating between people all the time. We're living in a sea of information, much of which is consciousness, but we don't recognise it as such, so we dismiss much of the hints that we see in research around that idea. But I think that's how things actually work, and there's much more magic to life and reality if we open our eyes and allow ourselves to perceive it.
I've heard you say once that you feel the universe is living, like a living thing.
Yeah, I really do. I feel the universe is a living thing, and there's a background hum of consciousness even in this chair. You know, clearly not the same type of self-aware consciousness that you get with a neural net in the brain.
Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. No, yeah, it's probably saying, I agree with you there. Yep, very good. Keep it up. Yep. But even in a strand of thread that makes up the background of that cloth there, there's consciousness in that. There's consciousness in the atoms, but not the same type of consciousness, but a background hum, if you like, and everything must hum or vibrate in a different way, but somehow alive, and therefore you have this magical world that we live in, far more magical than you ordinarily thought, where everything is alive and interconnected. And if we allow ourselves to notice that, then you realise that as you take a breath, you're breathing in consciousness. And I would even go as far as to say, if this state of interconnectedness and oneness, if you like, if there is only this one field, like the universe is one universe, if you like, well, there might be many, many more parallels, but if there's one consciousness, then the state you would say it's love. You would define it as love, interconnectedness, oneness, unity. So therefore, every breath you take, you breathe in particles of love. In fact, do you know how many particles are in a breath? Just to do a quick calculation. If you breathe in or out a litre of air, so there's 80% nitrogen, 20% oxygen. Each nitrogen atom has there's 2 nitrogen atoms in a molecule. They have seven protons, 7 neutrons, 7 electrons, and each atom of nitrogen, there is 6 times 10 to the power of 23 atoms of that in a litre. What that means is there are 6 and 23 zeros atoms of nitrogen in that space as I breathe out, and all of them perhaps are imbued with consciousness. So as I breathe in, I'm breathing in each litre of breath I breathe in, I'm breathing in 6 and 23 zeros atoms of pure consciousness. And it's just something to think about that you ordinarily wouldn't think about. But here's the thing, if you think about it in that way, life takes on a magical tint. And you think, every breath is pure consciousness, every breath. But when we disconnect ourselves from that and think that everything's just inert and lifeless, then we miss out on that magic, because in believing that, you feel great and you can walk about feeling fantastic. And the difference between feeling fantastic and not is actually just in what you're accepting as reality. And I love that kind of idea, and I think the truth of it is that everything is alive, and we're breathing in life all the time, we're breathing out life, we're moulding and shaping life all of the time. We just don't notice that we're doing it. And I like to think about it in that way and write about it in that way, because it helps people to feel much more important than they ordinarily thought they were, and that their life has far more value than they ever thought it had in the past.
You're uploading those little YouTube videos, with all these facts. You can tune in. What's your YouTube channel?
It's David R. Hamilton, PhD.
And then you're uploading them for people to see?
Yeah, I'm doing lots of new videos. In fact, I'm uploading a little series called Did You Know? And it's fascinating facts. And one of my fascinating facts was, did you know that in every cell of your body there's 2 meters of DNA? You have about 50 trillion cells in your body. So a quick calculation tells you that you have enough DNA in your body to stretch to the sun and back 350 times. 350 round trips. Now, just to put that into perspective, the sun is 93 million miles away. A round trip in a 747 or an Airbus would take about 40 years. So you're doing 40 years round trip, 350 times. That's how much DNA you have inside your body. And here's the beauty. What we now understand is we're constantly impacting our genes all the time. You know, in fact, the food that you eat has impacts. Everything creates a chemical environment in the body. If you think of someone that causes you stress, then you impact several hundred stress genes. Think of someone that you love, you impact several hundred genes associated with love and compassion, kindness, that kind of thing. But you're impacting these over that vast trillions of miles of DNA. So you're impacting trillions of miles of DNA in all the 50 trillion cells in your body just by where you point your mind. So that the impact you're having in the number of subatomic particles and atoms you're impacting just by thinking love or thinking hate, for example, is unfathomable. But we're doing that all the time. And I like these little fascinating snippets of information that help us to understand that we're far more than we ever thought we were.
We're not stuck.
Absolutely not. No. Only when we, well, not only, but many times when we think we're stuck, then we have that experience. But I find even when we're stuck, maybe it's an invitation to not try to go anywhere.
Yeah. But we're not even stuck with our genes or our DNA or...
In that sense, no, absolutely not. Because you're always evolving, but we impact our genes all the time. I mean, you can think of genes, it's not a completely accurate analogy, but you could think of them as little light bulbs that switch on and off. And, you know, there's a little domino effect that causes that. But you can activate and deactivate genes just by the experiences of your life. So thinking of someone you love can activate several hundred genes. Thinking of anything, if I visualize myself doing something, you know, running a race or moving my fingers or lifting a weight or being very, very confident, so I impact hundreds and hundreds of genes all throughout my DNA that begin to build and initiate biological processes in the body. So build neural connections in the brain, change physiological processes in the body so that my body becomes that which I'm imagining. But it starts with this effect of your mind at the genetic level. So we're not stuck with a genetic program that says this is who you are and this is all that you are. Actually, your genes are responding to what you're thinking about. And that is a paradigm shift in understanding as well, because your mind shifts the chemistry of the brain and body, which therefore activates and deactivates the genes. So you're not stuck. I mean, out with a small percentage of true genetic disorders, everything else, almost everything else is open to being impacted by how we think and how we lead our lives. Not just what we think, but the food that we eat as well. All of these things, the choices that we make, are always impacting ourselves right down beyond the cellular, but to the genetic level as well. And I think it's a really empowering idea, because if you're doing that all the time, then what else are you capable of doing? It's just we don't realise that we're doing it all the time. The moment you realise you're doing it, you suddenly feel empowered, because therefore the power is really just, where do I position my mind? Where do I point my mind? And therefore there is chemical and genetic consequences as I change the direction of my mind.
Yeah. And knowing, and once you start to have faith, and knowing that you just deserve the best, the most amazing possibility, and all those infinite possibilities that exist, there is one that is the ultimate, most fulfilling, and you can choose that path. And then the universe backs that up.
Absolutely, and and sometimes it's believing that I deserve that. Yeah, I grew up in a wee village in central Scotland, where I didn't really believe that. I mean, there was a lot of poverty in the village, and you know, and I grew up with a little belief that most people in the village had, that, you know, I'm not good enough, and who am I to be speaking on stage alongside, you know, Wayne Dyer, Louise Hay, and all that kind of stuff. You don't deserve that. And it's a little voice that still comes up from time to time, and you deal with it. But when you rewrite those beliefs with more empowering things, and you just do it anyway, you know. But when you rewrite these beliefs with affirmations and identify, you know, what's holding us back, and do some positive affirmations like, I do deserve that. I'm part of the universe and I have a divine right to experience happiness and fulfillment. I've said things like that repetitively, hundreds of times in my life, to help me to move up a level. And when you do that and you start to accept that maybe I do deserve to have happiness and joy and fulfillment, then we start moving towards it. And the circumstances of events that seem to happen to us are actually being shaped by us. And really what's often driving it is whether we believe that possibility is open to us. And if we do, then life can take on again this magical tint where we have the capacity to move where we really want to go, rather than where we think we're just being sent and we have no power over things.
On the cover of your latest book, there's a fish jumping out of, why is that? It's jumping out of his little bowl?
Yeah, it was because sometimes we feel that we're just in this bowl and we can't do it. So the fish jumping out of the bowl is like saying, well, what would it be like? A fish jumping out of water experiences a whole new world. We have this capacity to jump out of our bowls and experience a whole new world that wasn't open to us before because we didn't know it was possible. And so that world can be different for different people. It can be a world where you can experience the fulfillment of your dreams, or it might just be something completely different, but because of the limitations we impose on ourselves or that society tell us about what's possible for us, then we live in this little bowl. So it was just a metaphor, and it was almost like an affirmation on the front page that says, you can jump out of the bowl. Yeah.
But you don't know what's outside.
No, you don't. And
that's the fun part.
It's the fun part, and it's scary sometimes. I've taken many leaps of faith out of the bowl. I took a leap of faith. I jumped out of the bowl when I left the safety and security of the pharmaceutical industry. And I'd never been in the world. I went from the safety of high school straight into the university. I got my first class honours. I got offered a job by a very famous professor during the summer. I literally started work for him right through the summer. I finished on a Friday, started my PhD on the Monday. I finished my PhD 3 years later on a Friday, started in the pharmaceutical industry on the Monday. I had never actually been out in the world. I mean, when you're in pharmaceutical industry and all that, you get looked after. Same as at school, at university, you're looked after, really. You're not in the world.
No, you're in a system.
Yeah, you're in a system. And so I leapt out of that massive leap of faith. I was lost. Actually, at first I had no idea. I didn't know that to organise my first public speaking event, I couldn't just go down to human resources and ask them to organise. I had to go find a place to have the event. I had to find out how to advertise. I had to talk to people that I'd never really had to do before. And it was a huge leap of faith, but life has become much more juicy as a consequence.
Gosh, this is a juicy living tour, reporting another juicy story. This way.
People can just stand on their heads to see the juicy living tour there.
But what's funny is that I know that some of you guys that are really when you have this perfect mind and they're like, some people I'm sure are upsetting on this, but this is a perfect exercise to go beyond the imperfections. And yes, sometimes there is sound problems, or yes, sometimes there is the mic problem, but there is what we're saying and what's available right now, and how we can open up to what's really available instead of finding excuses.
Yeah, and you know what I found in my life is something that's helped me so many times is the ability to adapt to life, because life will not always be exactly as you want it to be, because I think there are bigger forces at bay shaping us as we grow in our consciousness in our lives. So things will not always be exactly, and when we want them to be exactly as we want them to be, we're going to get stuck, because we're always going to be unhappy that it's not exactly it is. So a great skill I've learned is if I can adapt and cut situations some slack, and therefore one of my affirmations has been about this ability to be flexible and adaptable. It means that whatever happens, you'll have an ability to get through it. So if your microphone's upside down, so it's upside down, and you don't have a problem with it, you're not held back by it, you can just blast it on. And if you apply that to the wider part of your life, then life is so much easier, because we're just allowing ourselves the freedom to adapt.
And then we see the beauty in it, because of that, I'm not taking it as seriously. I'm relaxing and being more into the listening. So it's actually, I'm more in gratitude. There's a lot of things that are involved then in the consequence of us being able to talk as we are and then share this message and you sharing it. And it has a rippling effect that sometimes we can't even think of, because as you said, there's bigger forces.
Absolutely. Yeah, so we're allowing ourselves the peace of mind by not fighting against the details. We're allowing ourselves the peace of mind to experience the moment and be grateful. It's so good to spend time every day just being grateful for stuff, and it's a great exercise. Psychologists give it a name. They call it a gratitude intervention. You only have to spend 5 minutes, a couple of minutes making a list of 5 to 10 things a day that you're grateful for that happened in the last 24 hours. But the consequences for your happiness are phenomenal. I mean, one study just compared people counting their blessings versus people counting their hassles. You know, I wrote about this in one of my books, Why Kindness is Good for You, and it was people, the ones counting their blessings after just a short period of weeks were 25% happier than those counting their hassles. And I would say most people count their hassles. We dwell on the stuff that's not working and that irritates us, and we forget to live in the moment and see the people and the blessings and the magic around us. But when we do that, we feel much, much better. And this study was just proving a point that gratitude really makes us happier in life.
It has a tremendous impact if at the end of the day we start thinking of all the things that didn't work versus all the things that worked, how we're going to wake up the next day. Of course, we're going to wake up much happier the following day, especially with the sleep. Did you also study that? What happens during the sleep?
Yeah, actually, when we sleep, in some ways it's like visualization. There's genes that we activate through the sleep. One of them is called the ZIF268, and it's just one of the genes involved in visualization. So it's almost like we're visualizing through our dreams. So the brain is actually being affected by as we sleep. And I would say, if you can go to sleep with gratitude, like a gratitude exercise, I often encourage people to do this gratitude exercise late at night, rather than watching the news or reading some negative piece of news, if it's on paper or on screen. Go to bed having contemplated the gratitudes of the day, and you will sleep much better. Much better, and your brain will start to encode things in a different way, so that you don't wake up in the morning feeling aggressive and frustrated and worried about stuff. You wake up feeling refreshed. That's been my own experience when I do the gratitude work late at night.
Well, thank you so much for all these delicious tips and this conversation and being with you here. We're actually, if you're wondering, at the Citizen M Hotel right in the center of Glasgow. This is a really, really cool hotel, and lovely owner or manager that allowed us to do this interview from here. I'm very grateful for this conversation, grateful to meet you in person, and that we can share this kind of information right now over the internet very fast, quickly. Even maybe probably by tomorrow when you'll be on stage. I'll surely be there to hear you and to send you good vibes.
Okay, well, thanks very much. All the good vibes I gratefully appreciate. Yeah. It's been great being here today. I've thoroughly enjoyed having this chat. It's been like a friendly chat in this nice hotel, and it's great for me because it adds something extra special to being back in Glasgow, to the city where I did my very first public talk after I left the pharmaceutical industry, and it feels like I'm back in the same place, but this time the first talk I did, there was 13 people there, and 9 of them were family and friends. And 3 people came who I met in a cafe the week before, and they only came if they didn't have to pay. So only one person came who'd paid, who'd responded to my 8 weeks of advertising in a Glasgow newspaper. And now I get to speak in the huge conference centre in Glasgow in front of 700 people, and it's amazing. For me, it's testimony to the power of visualising and following something that you believe in. You know, for me, it was even though my first public event, technically only one person but had paid, but 13 were there. I didn't lose faith. I said, even though I've left the pharmaceutical industry, left a really good job, and look what's happening, this event's cost me money. If I'm going to be broke in 3 months and I'll have to get a job again, I can't possibly go on like this. But I thought, but this is important to me, and sometimes when you do that, you find a way. It's not always a clear path, but if you keep your mind focused on where you want to go, then for me this is testimony to doing that. Now my life, it hasn't gone in a straight line. I've gone up and down and back to front and looked back in myself, but ups and downs are normal in life. Sometimes we think it's got to go in a straight line. I gradually improve, I get to where I'm going to be, a series of steps. My life never gone by a series of steps. It's all, some are big, some are small. There's catastrophic falls and drops, but it's all part of it's all part of moulding me into the person I need to be to meet this part. And I would say, I speak tomorrow, and it'll be, obviously people listening to this now, this will be in the past, but that for me, it's taken me this many years of ups and downs and growing as a person to be able to stand along right after Wayne Dyer. I mean, people say,
do a high five.
Yeah, and do a high five. People say, how do you follow Wayne Dyer? Well, it's probably taken me this long and the difficult circumstances in my life so that I could become the person I have to become, so that I can do that very thing in front of 700 people in my hometown. So I'm so excited, and it's testimony to the power of visualization. And as I say, it's not always a straight line, but it's like a bigger force is taking you to where you need to be so that you can meet the next part of your life as the person you need to be.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much for this delicious time. Much love, my beautiful co-creators from Glasgow. Bye-bye.
Bye.